The radio crackled one last time before pressed the transmission button. His finger hesitated for just a moment over the device that would either save his team or seal their fate. Around him, 4 other Navy SEALs crouched in the rocky outcrop, their breathing controlled despite the chaos that had erupted around their position 30 minutes earlier. "Base, this is Reaper 6, whispered into the headset. "We are compromised. Repeat, we are compromised. Request immediate extraction." The silence that followed felt like an eternity. Static filled their earpieces, punctuated only by the distant sound of voices shouting in a language none of them wanted to hear getting closer. Looked at his team leader, Senior Chief Petty Officer Jake, whose weathered face showed no emotion despite the gravity of their situation. Had been doing this for 15 years, long enough to know when a mission had gone sideways beyond repair. "Copy, Reaper 6. Extraction team is 40 minutes out. Can you hold position?" Exchanged glances with the other members of his team. 40 minutes might as well have been 40 hours given their current circumstances. Their reconnaissance mission had been simple on paper: infiltrate the remote mountain village, gather intelligence on the weapons cache, and get out without being detected. But intelligence reports had failed to mention the increased security presence, and now they found themselves pinned down with limited ammunition and nowhere to run. "Roger that, base. We'll hold position," responded, his voice steady despite the odds stacked against them. The mission had started 3 days earlier at Forward Operating Base Chapman in eastern Afghanistan. The intelligence briefing had been straightforward enough. A high-value target known only as the Engineer was reportedly storing advanced weapons in a compound located in the remote province. The weapons were believed to be destined for terrorist cells operating across the border in Pakistan, and stopping the shipment was considered critical to ongoing operations in the region. Had been part of SEAL Team 6 for 2 years, long enough to have earned the respect of his teammates, but not so long that he had lost the edge that comes with knowing you still had something to prove. At 28, he was the team's communications specialist and secondary sniper, skills that had served him well during previous deployments in Iraq and Syria. But this mission felt different from the moment they had received their orders. The team had inserted via helicopter under cover of darkness, landing in a valley approximately 8 kilometers from their target. The approach had been textbook perfect. They moved through the mountainous terrain with the practiced efficiency of men who had trained together for months, each step carefully planned and executed. Led the way, his instincts honed by countless missions in hostile territory. Behind him, Petty Officer First Class Tony served as their demolitions expert and point man, his compact frame allowing him to navigate the rocky terrain with surprising speed. Hospital Corpsman Second Class David followed, carrying not only his medical supplies, but also additional ammunition for the team's sniper rifle. At 32, was the oldest member of the team and had volunteered for special operations after serving as a field medic with Marine infantry units. His calm demeanor under pressure had saved more than one mission when things had gone wrong. Bringing up the rear was Petty Officer Second Class James Bear Washington, whose imposing 6'4" frame and natural strength made him the team's heavy weapons specialist. Despite his intimidating appearance, Bear possessed a gentle nature that made him popular with local civilians during humanitarian missions. His ability to carry twice the equipment load of an average soldier had proven invaluable during extended operations in remote locations. The first indication that something was wrong came when they reached the observation point overlooking their target. Through his binoculars, could see that the compound was significantly more active than their intelligence reports had suggested. Instead of the expected 3 or 4 guards, he counted at least 12 armed men patrolling the perimeter. Vehicle tracks in the dirt indicated recent heavy traffic, and the presence of additional buildings suggested the operation was larger than they had been led to believe. "This doesn't match our intel," whispered into his radio as the team settled into their concealed positions among the rocks. "I'm seeing multiple structures and way too many hostiles for a simple weapons cache." "Copy that, Reaper 6. Maintain observation and report what you see." For the next 6 hours, they watched and documented everything, sketched the layout of the compound while photographed guard rotations through a long-range camera, identified potential entry and exit points, while Bear kept watch for any signs that their presence had been detected, coordinated their observations, building a comprehensive picture of what appeared to be a much more significant operation than anyone had anticipated. The compound consisted of 5 main buildings arranged around a central courtyard. The largest structure appeared to be a warehouse, while the others looked like living quarters and administrative offices. Solar panels on the roofs indicated a self-sufficient power supply, and the presence of communication antennas suggested sophisticated coordination capabilities. Most concerning was the discovery of what appeared to be a laboratory facility in one of the smaller buildings, identifiable by the specialized ventilation system and the personnel wearing protective equipment. Base, this is Reaper 6. We need to talk to higher headquarters. This isn't just a weapons cache. It looks like some kind of research facility. Stand by, Reaper 6. The delay in response should have been their first warning that things were about to go wrong. In experience, operational commanders made quick decisions based on field intelligence. Extended radio silence usually meant that people far from the action were having discussions that rarely ended well for the troops on the ground. When the radio finally crackled back to life, the news was exactly what it expected but hoped to avoid. Reaper 6, you are authorized to conduct close reconnaissance of the primary target. Confirm the nature of the facility and identify any materials that pose an immediate threat. His jaw tightened imperceptibly, the only sign of his displeasure with orders that would put his team at significantly greater risk. Close reconnaissance meant leaving their safe observation point and getting close enough to the compound to gather detailed intelligence. It meant exposing themselves to detection and potential capture in hostile territory with no quick escape route. Roger Base, beginning close reconnaissance now. The team spent another hour planning their approach. The compound was situated on relatively flat ground, surrounded by rocky hills that provided excellent observation points, but limited concealment for anyone attempting to move closer. The guard posts were positioned to provide overlapping fields of fire, indicating that whoever had designed the security layout understood military tactics. They decided to approach from the north, where a dry creek bed provided a covered route to within 50 meters of the outer perimeter. Would lead the way, followed by and his camera equipment. Would remain with and bear at an overwatch position, ready to provide covering fire if the advance team was discovered. The movement to the creek bed took nearly 2 hours, with the team stopping frequently to observe the guards and ensure they hadn't been detected. The rocky terrain made silent movement challenging, and every shifted stone seemed to echo across the valley despite their best efforts to remain quiet. When it finally reached the perimeter, they discovered that their problems were bigger than anyone had imagined. Through gaps in the compound's walls, was able to photograph equipment that clearly indicated the facility was being used for chemical weapons research. Sophisticated laboratory equipment, industrial-grade ventilation systems, and personnel in full protective gear confirmed their worst fears about what the engineer was actually producing. Reaper 6, you need to see these photos. This is definitely a chemical weapons lab, and it looks like they're preparing to move product soon. I can see crates being loaded into trucks. Process this information quickly. The presence of chemical weapons elevated the mission from routine intelligence gathering to a potential national security emergency. The team was equipped for reconnaissance, not for disrupting a chemical weapons operation. They needed to get their intelligence back to headquarters immediately. Copy that, begin exfiltration to the rally point. We're moving now. That's when everything went wrong. As began his withdrawal from the perimeter, a guard who had been taking a smoke break behind one of the buildings spotted movement in the creek bed. The shout of alarm that followed brought every guard in the compound running toward their position. The first shots were fired before could reach cover. High-velocity rounds sparked off the rocks around his position as he rolled behind a boulder and returned fire with his suppressed rifle. Was caught in the open and had to sprint across exposed ground to reach the safety of the creek bed, the camera equipment bouncing against his back as bullets whined overhead. From their overwatch position, immediately began coordinating their response. Bear, suppressive fire on the guard towers. Find me those shooters on the west wall. Quickly adjusted his sniper rifle and began engaging targets through his scope. His first shot dropped a guard who was attempting to flank's position. His second took out a machine gunner who had set up a position to cover the creek bed. But for every target he eliminated, 2 more seemed to appear. The firefight intensified as more armed men poured out of the compound. Vehicle engines roared to life as the defenders organized a coordinated response to the intrusion. It became clear that this was no ordinary security force, but a well-trained military unit prepared for exactly this type of situation. "Reaper 6, we need to move," Bear shouted over the sound of gunfire. "They're trying to surround us." Looked through his binoculars and confirmed what Bear had observed. Armed men were moving to positions that would cut off their escape routes back to the extraction point. If they didn't move soon, they would be trapped in the rocky outcrop with no way out. "Fall back to our position now." The two SEALs began a fighting withdrawal, moving from cover to cover while Bear provided overwatch fire. Experience in urban combat proved invaluable as he used the terrain to mask his movement, appearing and disappearing among the rocks like a ghost. Despite his medical training rather than infantry background, showed remarkable composure under fire and managed to keep his camera equipment intact while returning accurate fire at their pursuers. But the enemy had advantages that were becoming more apparent with each passing minute. They knew the terrain intimately and had numerical superiority that allowed them to maintain pressure while flanking maneuvers developed. Most concerning was the disciplined way they conducted their assault, indicating professional military training rather than the typical militia tactics the SEALs were accustomed to facing. When finally reached the overwatch position, the team found themselves in a defensive perimeter with limited ammunition and no good options for escape. The enemy had effectively cut them off from their planned extraction route and was systematically closing the ring around their position. That's when made the radio call that would bring them to their current situation. The call for extraction that might save their lives or result in additional casualties as rescue helicopters flew into what was clearly a well-prepared ambush. Checked his ammunition for the third time in 5 minutes. 12 rounds left for his sniper rifle and 2 full magazines for his sidearm. Around him, his teammates conducted similar inventories with equally grim results. They had enough ammunition to hold their position for perhaps another 20 minutes of sustained fighting, but 40 minutes until extraction was a mathematical impossibility. "Contact north side," called out as he spotted movement among the rocks. "Multiple targets advancing on our position." Swung his rifle toward the threat and immediately identified 3 armed men attempting to work their way closer under cover of the rocky terrain. His first shot caught the lead man's center mass, dropping him instantly. The other 2 immediately sought cover, but their positions were now known. "Watch the east approach. Bear, keep eyes on the compound. They might try a vehicle assault." His calm voice provided an anchor of stability as chaos continued to develop around their position. Had served under other team leaders who either became paralyzed by complex tactical situations or made rash decisions that put their men at greater risk. Possessed the rare ability to process multiple threats simultaneously while maintaining the trust and confidence of his team. The radio crackled again. "Reaper 6, be advised extraction team is encountering unexpected resistance. They may be delayed." His expression remained unchanged, but could see the tension in his shoulders increase slightly. A delayed extraction meant they would have to hold their position even longer with dwindling ammunition supplies. It also suggested that the enemy had additional capabilities beyond what they had initially observed. "Roger base, will maintain position." As if in response to their radio transmission, the intensity of enemy fire increased dramatically. Machine gun fire raked their position from multiple directions, forcing the team to keep their heads down as bullets ricocheted off the rocks around them. The coordinated nature of the assault confirmed what they had all begun to suspect. They were facing a much more sophisticated enemy than their briefings had indicated. "I need you to find and eliminate that machine gun crew," said calmly. "Prepare to move to that outcrop on our left. We need to extend our perimeter before they get close enough to use grenades." Adjusted his scope and began scanning the enemy positions for the machine gun that was causing them the most problems. The crew had chosen their position well, firing from a concealed location that provided excellent cover while maintaining clear fields of fire on the SEAL position. It took him several minutes to identify the muzzle flash pattern that revealed their location. His shot was perfect, striking the gunner in the head and immediately silencing the weapon. But within seconds, another crew member had taken over the gun and resumed firing. Second shot eliminated the replacement gunner, but the weapon itself remained operational and would likely be manned again within minutes. "Good shooting," acknowledged. but we need to start thinking about alternatives to staying here. The alternatives, however, were limited and unappealing. Moving during daylight would expose them to observed fire from multiple enemy positions. Staying in place meant slowly running out of ammunition until they could no longer effectively defend themselves. Surrendering was not an option given the nature of their mission and the likelihood that capture would result in torture and execution. Bear, what do you think about using the thermite grenades to create a smoke screen? Asked. Bear considered the suggestion for a moment. Might work, but the wind is wrong. We'd end up obscuring our own vision more than theirs. Any ideas about that dead space to our rear? Had been studying the terrain behind their position since they had first taken cover. There's a narrow ravine about 200 meters back. If we could reach it, we might be able to move parallel to our original extraction route. What about the exposure getting there? Significant. We'd be in the open for about 50 meters with no cover. Weighed their options carefully. Attempting to reach the ravine would be extremely dangerous, but staying in their current position was ultimately unsustainable. The enemy was demonstrating patience and tactical discipline that suggested they were willing to wait for the SEALs to exhaust their ammunition rather than risk casualties in a direct assault. The decision was made for them when spotted movement that indicated the enemy was preparing to launch a coordinated attack from multiple directions. Multiple contacts moving into position, reported. Looks like they're preparing for a final assault. Looked at each member of his team. These men had followed him through numerous missions, trusting his judgment even when the odds seemed impossible. Now he was asking them to trust him one more time with a decision that would likely determine whether they lived or died. We're moving to the ravine. Leads, follows, then Bear, and I'll cover the withdrawal. When I give the signal, we move fast and we don't stop until we reach cover. Each man checked his equipment one final time. Ammunition was redistributed to ensure maximum effectiveness during the movement. Secured his camera equipment to prevent it from interfering with his mobility. Bear prepared to carry additional gear that might slow down other team members. Felt the familiar sensation of time slowing down that preceded moments of extreme danger. His senses seemed heightened, allowing him to process multiple inputs simultaneously while maintaining focus on his immediate responsibilities. The sound of enemy voices seemed clearer, the smell of gunpowder more distinct, the feeling of his rifle stock against his cheek more pronounced. Ready? Asked quietly. 4 heads nodded in unison. They had trained for situations like this countless times, but training could never fully replicate the psychological pressure of knowing that the next few seconds would determine their fate. Move. Sprinted from cover first, his small frame allowing him to present a minimal target as he raced across the open ground toward the ravine. Enemy fire immediately converged on his position, but his erratic movement pattern and the suppressive fire provided by his teammates allowed him to reach cover safely. Followed 30 seconds later, his longer stride eating up the distance quickly despite the additional weight of his equipment. A burst of automatic weapons fire kicked up dust around his feet, but he maintained his pace and reached the ravine without being hit. Went next, his sniper rifle feeling awkward in his hands as he sprinted across terrain that offered no concealment. Halfway to the ravine, he heard the distinctive crack of a high-powered rifle and felt the bullet pass close enough to his head that he could feel the displacement of air. The shot had come from a different direction than the other enemy fire, indicating the presence of a sniper he hadn't previously identified. He reached the ravine and immediately began scanning for the sniper's position. His teammates needed to know about this new threat before Bear and attempted their withdrawal. Through his scope, he caught a glimpse of movement in a window of one of the compound buildings. The angle and elevation were perfect for covering their escape route. Sniper in the compound, 2nd floor, east building, called out over the radio. Absorbed this information while calculating the timing for the remaining withdrawals. Bear would present a large target during his movement, and the newly identified sniper had a clear line of sight to most of their escape route. They needed to neutralize this threat before continuing their withdrawal. Can you take the shot? Studied the target through his scope. The range was significant, and the sniper had positioned himself well behind cover with only minimal exposure. The shot would require perfect timing and execution, and would only get one opportunity before the enemy sniper relocated. "I can take it, but I need Bear to draw his attention first." Bear understood immediately. He exposed himself just enough to attract the sniper's attention while remaining ready to seek cover instantly. The enemy sniper took the bait, adjusting his position to line up a shot at Bear's location. That moment of adjustment was all needed. His shot broke just as the enemy sniper settled behind his rifle. The bullet struck its target precisely, eliminating the threat and clearing the way for the final phase of their withdrawal. Bear moved immediately, his powerful legs carrying him across the open ground with surprising speed for someone his size. Waited until Bear was safely in the ravine before beginning his own movement, laying down covering fire even as he from their position. The team regrouped in the relative safety of the ravine, but they all knew their respite would be temporary. The enemy would quickly determine their new position and begin adapting their tactics accordingly. They needed to use their head start to maximum advantage. "Get on the radio and update base on our situation. Tell them we have confirmed intelligence on chemical weapons production, and we need that extraction immediately." As began his radio transmission, reflected on how quickly their simple reconnaissance mission had escalated into a life-or-death situation. The intelligence they had gathered was undoubtedly valuable, but it would only matter if they survived to deliver it. In his 2 years with the team, he had never faced a situation where their survival depended so heavily on factors beyond their control. The radio transmission completed, turned to with news that none of them wanted to hear. "Base says the extraction team is still 20 minutes out, and they're requesting we move to an alternate pickup zone. The original location is too hot." 20 more minutes of survival in hostile territory with an unknown number of enemy forces actively hunting them. Checked his ammunition one more time and tried not to think about the mathematical certainty that they would run out of bullets long before help arrived. But was already studying his map and planning their next move. After 15 years of military service, he had learned that survival often depended more on making good decisions under pressure than on having overwhelming firepower. His team had followed him this far because they trusted his judgment, and he was determined not to let them down now. "Alternate extraction point is 2 clicks north," announced. "We follow this ravine for about half the distance, then we'll have to cross open ground to reach the landing zone. 2 kilometers through hostile territory while being actively pursued by an enemy force of unknown size and capability." The mission that had started as a routine intelligence-gathering operation had become a test of everything they had learned during their military careers. Shouldered his rifle and prepared to follow his team leader once again into an uncertain future. The next 20 minutes would determine whether their last radio call had been a successful request for rescue or a final transmission before capture or death. In either case, they would face whatever came next together, as they had been trained to do. The ravine provided better cover than their previous position, but knew it was only a temporary solution. The rocky walls rose about 8 feet on either side, offering protection from direct fire but creating a natural trap if the enemy managed to position themselves at either end. He studied his GPS device one more time, confirming their route to the alternate extraction point while listening for sounds of pursuit. "They'll figure out where we went within 10 minutes, whispered, his experience in urban warfare making him acutely aware of how quickly a pursuing force could track their movement. "We need to be gone before they set up blocking positions." Nodded and signaled for the team to begin moving north through the ravine. The rocky bottom made their footsteps echo slightly despite their efforts to move quietly, but speed was now more important than stealth. Their enemies knew the general area where the SEALs were located, and every minute they remained stationary allowed the net to tighten around them. Found himself second in the formation, his sniper rifle slung across his back while he carried his sidearm at the ready. The confined space of the ravine made his long-range weapon useless, and he mentally prepared himself for the close-quarters combat that would likely occur if they were caught before reaching open ground. Behind him, moved with the fluid efficiency of someone accustomed to carrying heavy medical equipment across difficult terrain. The camera gear that contained their vital intelligence bounced rhythmically against his back, a constant reminder of why their mission had become so dangerous. The photographs documenting the chemical weapons facility would save countless lives if they could deliver them to headquarters, but only if they survived the next hour. Bear brought up the rear, his massive frame somehow managing to move through the narrow ravine without making excessive noise. Every few minutes he paused to listen for sounds of pursuit, his enhanced hearing allowing him to detect approaching threats before they became visible. So far, the only sounds behind them were distant voices and the occasional crack of a rifle as their pursuers fired at shadows. After 15 minutes of movement through the ravine, they reached a point where the rocky walls began to decrease in height, called a halt, and climbed carefully to the rim to observe the terrain ahead. What he saw confirmed his worst fears about their tactical situation. "We've got problems," he announced quietly as he rejoined the team. "The ravine ends about 200 meters ahead, and there's a quarter-mile of completely open ground between here and the next cover. I can see at least one enemy patrol moving to cut us off." The mathematics of their situation were becoming increasingly unfavorable. 4 men with limited ammunition against an unknown number of hostiles who possessed local terrain knowledge and numerical superiority. Their only advantages were superior training, better equipment, and the desperate motivation that came from knowing capture meant certain death. "How long until extraction?" asked, checking his watch and performing calculations he didn't want to complete. 15 minutes to the landing zone if we move fast," replied, "but we'll be completely exposed for most of that distance." Adjusted his radio and attempted to contact their extraction team directly. "Phoenix 6, this is Reaper 6. What's your current position?" The response came through clearly, providing the first good news they had received in the past hour. "Reaper 6, we're 8 minutes out from alternate LZ. Be advised we're taking sporadic ground fire, but nothing we can't handle." 8 minutes until the helicopters arrived, but they still had to reach the landing zone alive. Studied his map one more time, looking for alternatives to crossing the open ground that lay between them and safety. The topographical lines showed no other routes that would provide concealment, and attempting to circle around would add at least 20 minutes to their travel time. "We're going to have to make a run for it," decided. "Same formation as before. I'll provide overwatch from here while you move to that cluster of rocks about halfway across. Then I follow while provide security from the rocks." It was a desperate plan that relied heavily on the enemy's inability to coordinate their response quickly enough to prevent the SEALs from reaching the landing zone. But with their ammunition running low and time working against them, desperate measures had become their only option. Prepared to lead the movement by studying the terrain ahead and identifying the fastest route to the halfway point. The rocks had identified were actually part of an ancient stone wall that had partially collapsed, providing just enough cover to allow the team to regroup before making the final sprint to the extraction point. "Movement to the east," Bear called out quietly, his position at the rear of the formation giving him a view back down the ravine. "Multiple contacts approaching our position." Quickly climbed back up to the rim and confirmed Bear's observation. At least 6 armed men were moving through the ravine toward their position, advancing with the tactical discipline of professional soldiers rather than militia fighters. They had perhaps 5 minutes before the pursuit reached their location. "Change of plans," announced. "We all move together now. Lead us to that stone wall as fast as you can move. Everyone else maintain spacing but be ready to provide covering fire." The team climbed out of the ravine and immediately found themselves exposed on the open ground they had been hopping to avoid. The landscape was typical of the Afghan mountains, rocky and barren with scattered scrub vegetation that provided minimal concealment. In the distance, they could see their destination, a small cluster of trees that marked the designated landing zone. Set a punishing pace across the uneven ground, his compact frame allowing him to navigate the rocky terrain with remarkable speed. Behind him, the other team members struggled to maintain the spacing that would prevent a single enemy burst from hitting multiple targets while keeping up with their point man's rapid movement. They had covered about half the distance to the stone wall when the first shots rang out behind them. The enemy patrol had reached the end of the ravine and spotted the SEALs crossing the open ground. The range was still significant, but high-velocity rifle rounds began impacting around their position with increasing accuracy. "Keep moving," shouted, knowing that their only hope lay in reaching cover before the enemy could establish effective fire superiority. Felt a bullet pass close enough to his ear that he could hear the supersonic crack distinctly from the muzzle blast that followed a second later. The enemy was using precision rifles with experienced shooters, making their situation even more precarious than he had initially calculated. He increased his pace despite the growing burn in his legs from the rapid movement across uneven terrain. Stumbled slightly as his foot caught in a hidden depression between two rocks, but he recovered quickly without losing any of his equipment. The camera gear containing their vital intelligence remained secure on his back, protected by the specialized carrying case designed for operations in hostile environments. Whatever happened in the next few minutes, that intelligence had to reach American forces. Bear's powerful stride allowed him to keep pace with the smaller men despite his size, but could hear his teammates' labored breathing as they approached their maximum sustainable speed. The big man was carrying significantly more equipment than the others, including extra ammunition and demolition charges that might prove essential if they needed to destroy the enemy facility. They reached the stone wall just as the intensity of enemy fire increased dramatically. Instead of individual rifle shots, they now faced coordinated volleys from multiple weapons firing simultaneously. The enemy had deployed additional forces to the pursuit, probably including some of the security teams from the compound they had been observing. "Down," called out as he dove behind the largest section of remaining wall. The others followed immediately, seeking whatever cover the ancient stones could provide against modern weapons. Quickly assessed their situation from their new position. The stone wall provided excellent protection from the forces pursuing them from the ravine, but he could see additional enemy movements to their east and west. The defenders were attempting to establish a perimeter that would prevent the SEALs from reaching their extraction point. "Get on the radio to Phoenix 6. Tell them we're taking heavy fire and may need gun runs on enemy positions." Adjusted his radio and began transmitting their current situation to the incoming helicopters. The response was immediate and reassuring. "Copy that, Reaper 6. We have eyes on multiple heat signatures converging on your area. Stand by for close air support." The sound of rotor blades became audible in the distance, growing steadily louder as the extraction helicopters approached their location, but could also hear vehicle engines and increasing radio chatter from their pursuers, indicating that the enemy was committing additional resources to prevent their escape. "Contact left," called out, engaging targets that had appeared among the rocks to their west. His suppressed rifle spoke rapidly as he engaged multiple enemy positions simultaneously. Swung his sniper rifle toward the threat and immediately identified 3 enemy soldiers attempting to flank their position. His first shot eliminated the lead man instantly, but the others quickly sought cover among the rocks. Through his scope, he could see that these were well-equipped professional soldiers rather than the typical militia fighters they usually encountered. "Bear, take the east side. Watch our 6, commanded while engaging targets to the north with his own rifle. The enemy was pressing them from multiple directions simultaneously, demonstrating the kind of tactical coordination that suggested extensive military training. The firefight intensified as more enemy forces reached effective range. Machine gun fire began raking their position, forcing the SEALs to keep their heads down as bullets sparked off the ancient stones around them. Noted that the enemy was using interlocking fields of fire to prevent movement in any direction from their current position. "Reaper 6, this is Phoenix 6. We're 2 minutes out, but we're taking ground fire from multiple positions. We need you to mark the closest threats with smoke." Pulled a smoke grenade from his vest and prepared to mark the enemy position that posed the greatest threat to the incoming helicopters. The machine gun crew to their north had the best angle on the landing zone and would have to be eliminated before the extraction could proceed safely. "Bear, when I pop this smoke, put everything you have on that machine gun position," shouted over the sound of increasing enemy fire. Bear nodded and adjusted his position to get the best angle on the target. His heavy machine gun had been modified for increased portability, but it still packed enough firepower to suppress enemy positions effectively when used by someone with his strength and experience. Pulled the pin on the smoke grenade and hurled it toward the enemy machine gun position. The red smoke billowed immediately, marking the target clearly for both the incoming helicopters and Bear's supporting fire. Bear opened up with his machine gun, sending accurate bursts toward the enemy position while the helicopters adjusted their approach vector. The sound of helicopter rotors was now loud enough to drown out most other noise, and could see the lead aircraft approaching from the south. But he could also see muzzle flashes from multiple enemy positions as their pursuers concentrated their fire on the incoming rescue force. Phoenix 6 multiple ground threats marked with red smoke. Request immediate gun runs. The lead helicopter banked sharply and began its attack run, door gunners engaging enemy positions with devastating effect. The sound of 7.62 machine guns firing from the aircraft was distinctive, and watched enemy positions disappear in clouds of dust and debris as the helicopter's weapons found their targets. But the enemy response was more sophisticated than anyone had anticipated. A surface-to-air missile streaked upward from a concealed position, forcing the helicopter to break off its attack run and deploy defensive countermeasures. The missile missed its target, but the message was clear. The enemy possessed anti-aircraft capabilities that made the extraction extremely dangerous. "They've got SAMs," the pilot's voice crackled over the radio. "We need those positions marked before we can land." His mind raced as he processed this new information. Surface-to-air missiles meant they were facing a much more capable enemy than their intelligence had indicated. It also meant that the helicopters couldn't simply hover over their position and extract them under fire as they had originally planned. "Can you identify the SAM position?" asked while continuing to engage rifle targets around their perimeter. Swept his scope across the terrain, looking for the telltale signs of a missile launch position. The terrain provided numerous potential hiding spots, but the missile had left a distinctive smoke trail that pointed back toward its origin point. Through his scope, he spotted movement in a cluster of rocks about 800 meters to the northeast. "I've got eyes on the SAM position, but it's outside effective range for my rifle," reported. "Bear, what do you think about the thermite grenades?" asked, remembering the demolition charges in Bear's pack. Bear considered the suggestion briefly. "I'd have to get within 100 meters to make the throw, and that's across completely open ground." The helicopters continued to circle their position while taking sporadic ground fire from multiple enemy positions. Every minute they remained in the area increased the risk of losing an aircraft to enemy action, but they couldn't land safely with active SAM positions threatening their approach. "Phoenix 6, what's your fuel situation?" asked, knowing that helicopter operations at high altitude consumed fuel rapidly. "We've got about 15 minutes of loiter time before we have to return to base for fuel. 15 minutes to neutralize the SAM position and clear the landing zone of enemy forces." Looked around at his team, all of whom were running dangerously low on ammunition after the extended firefight. They had perhaps enough rounds remaining for 5 more minutes of sustained combat. "New plan," announced. "We're going to assault the SAM position directly. It's our only chance of getting those birds on the ground." The plan was audacious to the point of being suicidal, but their alternatives had been reduced to surrender or death. 4 men with minimal ammunition attacking a prepared enemy position across open ground represented the kind of desperate gamble that either earned medals or got people killed. "You and provide covering fire from here. Bear and I will assault the SAM position. When we move, put everything you have on that target." Checked his remaining ammunition and nodded grimly. He had perhaps 3 magazines left for his rifle, barely enough to provide effective covering fire for an assault across 800 meters of open ground. His medical training had included combat skills, but he was primarily equipped for treating casualties rather than creating them. "How many rounds do you have left?" asked as he prepared for what might be their final tactical movement. 8 rounds for the rifle, 2 magazines for my sidearm," replied, performing mental calculations about ammunition expenditure rates during a combat assault. "Bear his remaining demolition charges and machine gun ammunition. 3 thermite grenades, 1 fragmentation grenade, and about 200 rounds for the machine gun." Made his final preparations for the assault, checking his gear and ensuring that his rifle was loaded with a full magazine. After 15 years of military service, he had never led an attack with such unfavorable odds, but his team's survival depended on eliminating that SAM position before their helicopter support was forced to withdraw. "When I give the signal, we move fast and we don't stop until we reach that position," announced. "Keep that covering fire coming as long as you have ammunition." Slung his sniper rifle and drew his sidearm, knowing that the close-range work ahead would require a different set of skills than precision shooting. The familiar weight of his pistol provided some comfort as he prepared to follow his team leader across ground that offered no concealment and minimal cover. Bear made final adjustments to his machine gun, ensuring that it would function reliably during the high-intensity firing that lay ahead. His powerful frame would be essential for carrying the heavy weapon across the rough terrain while maintaining the mobility necessary for an infantry assault. Phoenix 6, we're going to assault the SAM position in 30 seconds. When you see us moving, provide whatever fire support you can without hitting our position. The helicopter pilot acknowledged the transmission and began positioning his aircraft for a supporting attack. The door gunners prepared their weapons for precision fire that would suppress enemy positions without endangering the assaulting SEALs. Took one last look at his teammates, men who had followed him through numerous dangerous missions without question. Now he was asking them to trust his judgment one more time in a situation where the margin for error was essentially non-existent. Ready? 3 determined nods answered his question. These men had trained for situations like this, but no amount of training could fully prepare someone for the psychological reality of attacking a superior enemy force across open ground with inadequate ammunition. Move! The 3 SEALs left the safety of the stone wall and began their assault across the rocky ground toward the enemy SAM position. Behind them, and opened fire with everything they had, sending rounds toward known and suspected enemy positions in an attempt to suppress return fire. Felt the familiar time distortion that accompanied moments of extreme danger. His surroundings seemed to take on enhanced clarity while his conscious mind processed multiple threats simultaneously. The sound of his boots on the rocky ground, the weight of his equipment, the feeling of his pistol in his hand all became intensely vivid as adrenaline heightened his senses. 50 meters from the stone wall, enemy fire began converging on their position. High-velocity rounds cracked overhead while others sparked off rocks around their feet. Bear's machine gun provided suppressive fire while he ran, his extraordinary physical strength allowing him to maintain accuracy despite the difficult circumstances. 100 meters from their objective, saw muzzle flashes from the SAM position as the enemy crew attempted to engage them with small arms fire. Immediately adjusted their approach vector to take advantage of a slight depression in the ground that provided minimal defilade from the enemy position. The helicopters began their gun runs, door gunners walking their fire across suspected enemy positions while avoiding the area where the SEALs were conducting their assault. The combined noise of rotor blades and machine gun fire created a chaotic audio environment that made communication difficult but helped mask their movement. 200 meters from the target, Bear stumbled as a bullet caught him in the thigh. The big man rolled with the impact and came up running, his machine gun still ready for action despite the wound. Could see blood on Bear's leg, but his teammates showed no signs of slowing down as they approached their objective. The final 50 meters of the assault required them to climb over increasingly rocky terrain that channeled their approach into a narrow avenue covered by enemy fire. Led the way, his rifle speaking rapidly as he engaged targets that appeared among the rocks ahead of them. Could see the SAM launcher clearly now, a sophisticated piece of equipment that confirmed their worst fears about the enemy's capabilities. 2 men in military uniforms were attempting to reload the system, while a third provided security with an assault rifle. Bear's final charge up the rocky slope was a testament to his determination and physical conditioning. Despite his wound, he reached the enemy position first and eliminated the security guard with a burst from his machine gun, and followed immediately, overwhelming the remaining crew before they could complete the reload process. The thermite grenade that Bear placed on the SAM launcher ensured that the system would never threaten another aircraft. As the intense heat began destroying the sophisticated electronics, radioed their success to the waiting helicopters. Phoenix 6 SAM position is destroyed. Landing zone is clear for extraction. The lead helicopter immediately began its approach to the designated landing zone, while the second aircraft continued to provide overwatch fire on remaining enemy positions. Helped Bear apply a field dressing to his leg wound and provided security during the final phase of their extraction. The sight of the helicopter landing in a cloud of dust was the most beautiful thing had seen in his 2 years with the Special Operations community. As they loaded Bear into the aircraft and secured the vital intelligence they had gathered, He reflected on how quickly their routine reconnaissance mission had become a life-or-death struggle against a sophisticated enemy force. But they had succeeded. The intelligence about the chemical weapons facility would prevent countless casualties, and despite the overwhelming odds, they had all survived to fight another day. As the helicopter lifted off and began its flight back to base, allowed himself to feel the satisfaction that came from a mission accomplished under impossible circumstances. The debrief would come later, along with questions about how their intelligence had been so inaccurate regarding enemy capabilities. But for now, it was enough that they were alive and heading home with information that would save lives and disrupt a major threat to regional security. Through the helicopter window, watched the compound disappear in the distance, knowing that their brief visit had changed the strategic situation in the region significantly. The enemy would never again have the element of surprise that had made their chemical weapons operation possible. 6 months later, found himself back in Afghanistan, but this time the circumstances were entirely different. The intelligence his team had gathered during their desperate escape from the chemical weapons facility had triggered a massive international response that fundamentally altered the strategic landscape of the region. What had started as a routine reconnaissance mission had uncovered a network of chemical weapons production facilities spanning 3 countries. The debriefing process after their extraction had taken weeks. Intelligence analysts pored over every photograph had taken, every detail the team could remember about the facility's layout and operations. The chemical weapons production capability they had discovered was far more advanced than anyone in the intelligence community had suspected, with implications that reached far beyond the immediate regional conflict. Now wore the rank insignia of a petty officer first class, his promotion recognition for exceptional performance during the mission that had nearly cost them their lives. But rank advancement seemed trivial compared to the satisfaction of knowing their actions had prevented chemical weapons from reaching terrorist networks across the Middle East and Central Asia. The current mission brought him back to the same valley where they had nearly died, but now he was part of a much larger operation designed to eliminate the entire chemical weapons network they had uncovered. Intelligence gathered from multiple sources had revealed that the engineer was actually Dr., a former Iraqi weapons specialist who had been recruiting other scientists to establish production facilities in remote locations throughout Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iran. "Hard to believe we were running for our lives in this exact spot 6 months ago," commented as their helicopter approached the landing zone. The compact Latino had also received a promotion and was now leading his own fire team within the expanded SEAL platoon assigned to the operation. Now wearing the chevrons of a Master Chief Petty Officer, studied the terrain through the helicopter window with the practiced eye of a veteran Special Operations leader. The mission that had nearly ended in disaster had ultimately enhanced his reputation within the Special Operations community, leading to his assignment as platoon commander for what the Pentagon was calling Operation Clean Sweep. "Different mission, different rules of engagement," replied. "This time we're not sneaking around trying to avoid detection. We're going in with overwhelming force to make sure never produces another ounce of chemical weapons." The operation involved coordinated strikes on 6 different facilities across 3 countries, with SEAL Team 6 responsible for the primary target where was believed to be located. Intelligence indicated that the scientist had moved his main laboratory to a heavily fortified compound in the same mountain range where their original reconnaissance mission had gone wrong. Now a hospital corpsman first class had volunteered to return despite having earned the right to rotate back to the United States. The intelligence photographs he had risked his life to obtain had provided the foundation for the entire international operation, and he felt personally invested in seeing the mission through to completion. Bear's leg wound had healed completely, leaving only a small scar as evidence of the enemy bullet that had nearly prevented their escape. The experience had convinced him to extend his enlistment for another 4 years, saying that he couldn't imagine doing any other job after experiencing the satisfaction of making a real difference in global security. The team had been augmented with additional personnel for the current operation, bringing their total strength to 12 highly trained special operations personnel. The additional firepower and technical capabilities would ensure they could handle any resistance they encountered without having to rely on desperate improvisation, as they had during their previous visit. 2 minutes to insertion, the helicopter crew chief announced over the intercom. Through the windows, could see the same rocky terrain where they had made their desperate run for the extraction point. But now it was marked with GPS coordinates for artillery support and close air support assets that would provide overwhelming firepower if needed. The insertion went exactly according to plan, with both helicopters landing simultaneously and deploying their teams before immediately departing for their holding area. Unlike their previous covert insertion, this operation had been designed for maximum shock effect rather than stealth. Would know they were coming long before they reached his facility. Found himself assigned as the platoon's designated marksman, responsible for providing precision fire support during the assault on the main compound. His experience during the previous mission had convinced his superiors that he possessed the combination of technical skill and tactical judgment necessary for the expanded role. Movement on the ridge line, reported as he scanned the terrain through his rifle scope. Multiple personnel in defensive positions. Studied the intelligence photos one more time, comparing them to the terrain visible through his binoculars. The compound had been significantly expanded since their last visit, with additional buildings and improved defensive positions that suggested had learned from their previous intrusion. Looks like our friend learned his lesson about security, observed. What do you think about those new structures on the north side? Studied the buildings through his own optical equipment, comparing them to the photographs he had taken during their reconnaissance mission. Definitely new construction, probably within the last 3 months. The architectural style suggests they might be additional laboratory facilities. The expansion of this operation confirmed intelligence reports indicating that the chemical weapons network had been accelerating production in response to increased international pressure. The scientist knew that his window of opportunity was closing and was apparently attempting to produce as much chemical weapons material as possible before his facilities were discovered and destroyed. Take your team around to the east approach. We'll provide overwatch from this position while Bear's team secures the north perimeter, commanded, implementing the tactical plan they had rehearsed extensively during training. The assault on S's compound represented the culmination of months of intelligence gathering and operational planning involving multiple government agencies and international partners. Unlike their previous mission, which had been designed to gather information without detection, this operation was intended to completely eliminate S's capability to produce chemical weapons. Established his sniper position among the same rocks where he had engaged enemy targets during their previous escape. The irony of returning to fight from positions where he had nearly died was not lost on him, but his increased experience and improved equipment made him significantly more effective than he had been 6 months earlier. Through his scope, he could observe the compound's security measures in detail. Had learned from their previous intrusion and implemented multiple defensive improvements including reinforced guard positions, overlapping fields of fire, and what appeared to be early warning systems designed to detect approaching forces. I count at least 20 personnel in defensive positions, reported. They're definitely expecting company. The intelligence briefings had indicated that had recruited additional security personnel from various military and paramilitary organizations throughout the region. Unlike the relatively inexperienced guards they had encountered during their reconnaissance mission, these defenders appeared to be well-trained professional soldiers equipped with modern weapons. Bear, what do you see on the north side? Asked as his team leaders completed their initial reconnaissance of the target area. Bear's team had moved into position to observe the compound from a different angle, providing additional perspective on the defensive preparations and building layouts. His powerful optical equipment allowed him to identify details that might not be visible from other positions. Looks like they've got heavy weapons positions set up to cover all the approaches, Bear reported. I can see at least 2 machine gun nests and what might be mortar positions. The intelligence about defensive improvements had been anticipated, but seeing the extent of preparations firsthand was sobering. The compound had been transformed from a lightly defended research facility into a fortified position capable of resisting a significant assault. Made tactical adjustments based on the information his team leaders were providing. The original assault plan had been based on intelligence photographs that were several weeks old, and the defensive improvements required modifications to ensure the mission's success while minimizing casualties. Change of plans, announced. We're going to need close air support to neutralize those heavy weapons positions before we can assault the compound safely. The close air support assets were already airborne and standing by for exactly this type of situation. F-18 fighters equipped with precision-guided munitions were orbiting the area, ready to provide immediate fire support when requested. The pilots had been briefed on the target and the rules of engagement that would govern their participation in the operation. Began the process of identifying and marking targets for the airstrikes, using his rifle scope to observe each defensive position and determine the most effective approach for neutralizing the threats. His experience as a sniper gave him the tactical knowledge necessary to understand how the defensive positions were integrated and which targets should be prioritized. I can mark 3 primary targets that will significantly degrade their defensive capability, reported. The 2 machine gun positions and what appears to be a command post in the central building. Coordinated with the aircraft while his team leaders continued their reconnaissance of the expanded compound. The combination of ground observation and aerial surveillance was providing a comprehensive picture of defensive preparations and the tactical challenges they would face during the assault. The first airstrike was devastatingly effective, with precision-guided munitions eliminating both machine gun positions within seconds of each other. The explosion sent clouds of dust and debris into the air, while secondary explosions indicated that ammunition storage areas had been hit as well. Good hits on both targets, observed through his scope. Significant reduction in defensive fire's capability. But defenders adapted quickly to the air attack, with personnel moving to alternate positions and adjusting their defensive posture to account for the loss of their heavy weapons. The professional quality of their response confirmed intelligence reports about the improved caliber of security personnel had recruited. Multiple personnel moving to secondary positions, Bear reported. These guys know what they're doing. The second airstrike targeted the command post, but the results were less definitive than the attacks on the machine gun positions. The building sustained significant damage, but could observe personnel moving in and around the structure, indicating that at least some of the command and control capability remained intact. Partial success on the command post, reported. Building is damaged but still occupied. Made the decision to begin the ground assault while the defenders were still adjusting to the effects of the airstrikes. Timing was crucial in operations like this, and waiting too long would allow the enemy to fully adapt their defensive positions to the changed circumstances. All teams begin assault, provide overwatch, and engage targets of opportunity. The coordinated assault on compound was a textbook example of special operations tactics executed with precision and overwhelming force. Team approached from the east, while Bear's team advanced from the north, with team providing supporting fire from the west. Engaged individual targets as they appeared, his precision rifle eliminating key personnel before they could coordinate effective resistance. His elevated position provided excellent observation of the entire compound, allowing him to identify threats and engage them before they could affect the assaulting teams. The resistance was fierce but disorganized, with defenders fighting as individuals rather than as a coordinated unit. The loss of their heavy weapons and command post had disrupted their defensive plan, forcing them to react to the assault rather than implementing a prepared defense. Breaching charges set on the main laboratory building, reported as his team reached their primary objective. Stand by for detonation. The explosion that followed was much larger than anticipated, with a fireball and shock wave that indicated the presence of volatile chemicals within the laboratory. Secondary explosions continued for several minutes as stored materials and equipment were consumed in the blaze. Chemical fire in the main lab, observed from his position with his team. We need to be careful about toxic fumes downwind of that position. The unexpected intensity of the fire complicated the tactical situation by creating a hazard that could affect both the assaulting teams and any personnel who might be escaping from the compound. Immediately ordered gas masks for all personnel and adjusted the assault routes to avoid the contaminated area. Bear's team had reached the northern perimeter and was systematically clearing buildings that might contain additional laboratory equipment or chemical weapons materials. Each structure required careful searching to ensure that no weapons materials would survive the operation. Multiple laboratory setups in the north buildings, Bear reported. Looks like was running a bigger operation than we thought. The discovery of additional laboratory facilities confirmed intelligence assessments that had been expanding his chemical weapons production capability significantly. The size and sophistication of the operation explained why eliminating his network had required such an extensive international effort. Continued to provide overwatch as the assault teams methodically cleared each building in the compound. His position allowed him to observe the entire operation and ensure that no defenders escaped to regroup or launch counterattacks against the exposed assault teams. Movement in the southeast building, reported. Looks like someone trying to escape through a back exit. His shot eliminated the fleeing figure before they could clear the compound perimeter, but the incident highlighted the importance of maintaining observation on all potential escape routes during the operation. Himself had not yet been positively identified, and preventing his escape was a critical mission objective. The systematic destruction of chemical weapons facility took nearly 4 hours to complete. Each laboratory had to be searched for weapons materials, documents, and equipment that might provide intelligence about other facilities in the network. Demolition charges were placed to ensure complete destruction of any capabilities that could not be removed for analysis. Building clearance complete, reported as his team finished searching the last structure. No sign of in any of the main buildings. The absence of their primary target was concerning, but not entirely unexpected. Intelligence had indicated that rarely remained at any single facility for extended periods, moving frequently between different locations to avoid exactly this type of targeted operation. Discovered a hidden underground facility that had not appeared in any of their intelligence photographs. The concealed entrance led to an additional laboratory complex that had been constructed beneath the main compound, indicating that its operation was even larger and more sophisticated than anyone had suspected. Underground facility contains extensive laboratory equipment and what appears to be a production line for chemical weapons, reported after conducting an initial survey of the hidden complex. The underground discovery required additional time for proper clearance and demolition, but it also provided a wealth of intelligence about its methods and the extent of his chemical weapons network. Computer equipment and documents found in the hidden facility would provide investigators with information about other production sites and personnel involved in the operation. Bear's team discovered evidence that had been at the compound recently, but had apparently departed shortly before the assault began. Personal items and warm food suggested that their primary target had escaped with very little advance warning of the impending attack. Was here within the last few hours, Bear reported. Looks like he left in a hurry. While disappointing, his escape did not significantly diminish the success of the operation. His main production facility had been completely destroyed, along with enough chemical weapons materials to supply terrorist organizations for years. The intelligence gathered would enable follow-up operations against other facilities in his network. Maintained his overwatch position until all teams had completed their assigned tasks and were ready for extraction. The compound that had nearly cost them their lives 6 months earlier was now a smoking ruin that would never again threaten regional security. The extraction helicopters arrived exactly on schedule, landing in the same area where the team had made their desperate escape during their previous mission. But this time, they departed as victors rather than survivors, carrying intelligence and chemical samples that would enable the complete dismantling of weapons network. As their helicopter climbed away from the destroyed compound, reflected on how dramatically their situation had changed since their last visit to this valley. 6 months ago, they had been 4 men running for their lives with vital intelligence and minimal ammunition. Today, they were part of a coordinated international operation that had eliminated a major threat to global security. The mission represented everything that Special Operations Forces were designed to accomplish: precise application of military force to achieve strategic objectives that could not be accomplished through conventional means. The chemical weapons that had been producing would never reach terrorist organizations, and the intelligence they had gathered would prevent similar operations from developing in the future. Looked around at his expanded team, now including personnel who had not been part of their original desperate escape from this same valley. The success of their current mission validated the risks they had taken during their reconnaissance 6 months earlier and demonstrated the strategic value of Special Operations Forces in addressing unconventional threats. "Outstanding work, everyone," announced as their helicopter headed back to base. "This is what we trained for, and this is why our mission matters." The debrief would reveal the full scope of chemical weapons network and provide the foundation for follow-up operations designed to eliminate remaining facilities in other countries. But the primary threat had been neutralized, and the intelligence gathered would prevent similar operations from reaching operational capability in the future. Understood that their work was far from finished. Remained at large, and other components of his network continued to operate in different locations. But the destruction of his main production facility represented a significant victory in the ongoing effort to prevent chemical weapons from reaching terrorist organizations. The helicopter carrying the team back to base passed over the same terrain where they had made their desperate escape 6 months earlier. The landing zone where they had nearly died was now just another piece of Afghan landscape, marked only by the memories of men who had proven that courage and determination could overcome impossible odds. Looking down at the rocky ground where Bear had been wounded and where they had all nearly run out of ammunition, felt a deep satisfaction that came from seeing a mission through from desperate beginning to successful conclusion. Their reconnaissance had uncovered the threat, and their follow-up operation had eliminated it completely. The chemical weapons that would have killed thousands of innocent people would never be produced, and the intelligence they had gathered would prevent similar threats from developing in the future. It was the kind of strategic victory that Special Operations Forces were designed to achieve, proving once again that small teams of highly trained personnel could accomplish objectives far beyond their apparent capabilities. 2 years after the destruction of Smain facility, stood in a briefing room at Naval Special Warfare Command headquarters in Virginia Beach, studying satellite photographs that showed a level of sophisticated threat development that exceeded anything they had previously encountered. The man known as the Engineer had not only survived their operations against his chemical weapons network, but had evolved his methods to become an even more dangerous adversary. The intelligence briefing revealed that Doctor had spent the past 18 months establishing a new type of operation that combined chemical weapons production with advanced delivery systems capable of reaching targets hundreds of miles from their launch points. Instead of relying on terrorist networks to transport his weapons, had developed the capability to strike directly at military installations and civilian populations throughout the Middle East and Central Asia. "What you're looking at represents a fundamental shift in the threat we're facing," the intelligence officer explained as he displayed satellite images of SNU facility. "Our target has learned from our previous operations and adapted his methods to minimize vulnerability to the type of direct assault that proved so effective 2 years ago." Studied the photographs with the practiced eye of someone who had seen work firsthand. The new facility was located in a remote area of northern Pakistan, built into a natural cave system that would provide protection against airstrikes while offering multiple escape routes if ground forces attempted an assault. Now wearing the insignia of a senior chief petty officer and serving as the operation's ground force commander, pointed to features in the satellite images that indicated sophisticated defensive preparations. Had clearly studied their previous assault and implemented countermeasures designed to prevent similar operations from succeeding. "The underground construction makes conventional airstrikes ineffective," observed, "and the multiple tunnel systems would allow personnel to escape even if we managed to penetrate the outer defenses." The strategic situation had become significantly more complex since escape from his destroyed facility in Afghanistan. Intelligence agencies from multiple countries had been tracking his activities as he established new production capabilities while developing delivery systems that fundamentally altered the threat he posed to regional security. Now a chief petty officer leading his own SEAL platoon had spent months analyzing new operational methods. The intelligence gathered from various sources painted a picture of an adversary who had learned from previous encounters and evolved his capabilities to stay ahead of international efforts to eliminate his network. "He's not just producing chemical weapons anymore," explained. Intelligence indicates he's developed delivery systems that can reach targets in Israel, Turkey, and even parts of Europe. We're looking at a strategic threat rather than just a regional one. The photographs showed evidence of rocket production facilities integrated with the chemical weapons laboratories, indicating that had successfully combined his expertise in weapons production with advanced delivery technologies. The implications were sobering for anyone responsible for regional security and counterterrorism operations. Who had transferred to an intelligence analysis role after his experiences in Afghanistan, provided additional context about its expanded network. The scientist had apparently recruited specialists in rocket technology and guidance systems, significantly enhancing the threat his chemical weapons posed to civilian and military targets. Communications intercepts suggest he's planning something significant within the next few weeks, reported. The increased activity at his facility and the movement of personnel indicate they're preparing for a major operation. Bear had remained with the direct action teams, but his role had expanded to include planning and coordination responsibilities that reflected his experience with operations. The big man's understanding of the enemy's tactics and defensive methods made him invaluable for developing approaches to the new threat. The problem is access, Bear explained while studying topographical maps of the facility's location. The cave system is located in terrain that makes helicopter insertion extremely difficult, and any ground approach would require crossing several kilometers of open mountain terrain where we'd be completely exposed. The tactical challenges presented by this new facility exceeded anything they had previously encountered. The natural cave system provided protection against airstrikes, while the remote location and difficult terrain made traditional special operations approaches extremely risky. Had been selected for the mission based on his previous experience with operations and his demonstrated ability to adapt to unexpected tactical situations. But the current threat required capabilities beyond those of traditional direct action teams, necessitating a more complex approach that combined special operations forces with intelligence assets and advanced technology. The mission requires us to not only eliminate current capability, but also to gather intelligence about his delivery systems and any weapons he may have already produced, the briefing officer explained. We need to ensure that no chemical weapons escape our net when we hit the facility. The intelligence requirements meant that the mission could not rely solely on the destructive approach that had been successful in Afghanistan. They needed to capture alive if possible, along with detailed information about his weapons production and delivery capabilities. Studied the mission parameters while considering the personnel and equipment requirements necessary for success. The combination of intelligence gathering, direct action, and technical exploitation would require a larger and more diverse team than they had used for previous operations against facilities. We're looking at a joint operation involving multiple special operations units, intelligence assets, and probably CIA paramilitary teams, concluded. This is beyond the scope of a single SEAL platoon. The expanded mission scope reflected the strategic importance that senior military and civilian leaders placed on eliminating this threat permanently. His ability to strike targets throughout the region with chemical weapons had elevated him from a regional problem to a threat requiring the highest level of military response. Found himself assigned as the senior enlisted advisor for planning the operation, a role that reflected both his experience with previous facilities and his demonstrated tactical judgment under extreme conditions. The responsibility was significant, but his first-hand knowledge of their adversaries' methods would be essential for mission success. The key is understanding how thinks, explained during one of the planning sessions. He's learned from our previous operations and adapted his methods accordingly. We need to anticipate how he'll respond to different approaches and plan accordingly. The planning process took 6 weeks and involved analysts and operators from multiple organizations. CIA paramilitary officers provided expertise in unconventional warfare and intelligence gathering, while Army Special Operations personnel contributed capabilities in communications and technical exploitation. Air Force Special Operations assets would provide transportation and fire support, with the understanding that traditional air power would be limited by the target's underground construction. Navy Explosive Ordnance Disposal Specialists would handle the technical challenges associated with chemical weapons and improvised explosive devices. This represents one of the largest special operations missions conducted in the region, the Joint Task Force commander explained during the final briefing. Success depends on precise coordination between multiple units with different capabilities and mission requirements. The insertion would occur over multiple nights, with different teams establishing positions around the facility before the main assault began. The complex approach was necessary to prevent from detecting the operation and escaping before they could complete their mission objectives. Would deploy with the initial reconnaissance team, responsible for establishing observation posts and confirming the layout of the facility. His experience with sniper operations and target identification would be essential for providing accurate intelligence about defensive positions and personnel movements. His platoon would conduct the primary assault on the facility's main entrance, while Bear's team secured potential escape routes through the tunnel system. Would coordinate the overall operation from a command post established outside the immediate target area. The mission launched on a moonless night in late October, with teams inserting via helicopter at locations up to 10 kilometers from the target. The extended approach distances were necessary to avoid detection by security forces, who had demonstrated sophisticated surveillance capabilities during previous encounters. Found himself leading a four-man reconnaissance team that included specialists in communications, technical intelligence, and explosive ordnance disposal. Their mission was to establish observation posts and gather detailed intelligence about the facility's layout and defensive preparations. The approach to their observation post required nearly 8 hours of movement through mountainous terrain that offered excellent concealment, but made rapid movement extremely difficult. Every step had to be carefully planned to avoid detection while maintaining the stealth necessary for mission success. When they finally reached their designated position overlooking the facility, was struck by the sophisticated nature of the construction. The satellite photographs had not fully captured the extent of the defensive preparations or the obvious effort that had been invested in creating an impregnable position. "This is definitely not the same kind of facility we hit in Afghanistan," reported through his encrypted communication system. "Has learned from our previous operations and built something designed specifically to resist the kind of assault that worked before." The facility's entrance was protected by multiple defensive positions that provided overlapping fields of fire while offering protection against both direct and indirect fire weapons. Guard towers positioned on elevated terrain provided observation over all possible approach routes, while the natural cave system offered protection against airstrikes. Through his spotting scope, could observe the movement patterns of security forces. The guards demonstrated the professional demeanor and tactical discipline that indicated extensive military training, confirming intelligence reports about the improved quality of personnel had recruited for his expanded operation. "I count at least 30 personnel in defensive positions, with additional personnel moving in and out of the cave system," reported. "These guys are definitely professionals, not the militia types we encountered previously." The reconnaissance phase continued for 48 hours, while other teams moved into position around the facility's perimeter. Each team reported similar observations about the sophisticated defensive preparations and the professional quality of security forces. The assault team established their position in a rocky outcrop approximately 1 kilometer from the facility's main entrance. The approach route they would use during the assault offered good concealment, but required movement across terrain that would expose them to defensive fires during the final phases of their attack. Bear's team had the most challenging assignment, requiring them to infiltrate the mountainous terrain above the facility and position themselves to block escape routes through the tunnel system. Intelligence indicated that had prepared multiple exit points that would allow him to escape even if the main facility was overrun. "All teams report ready for operation commencement," announced during the final coordination call. "Execute at first light tomorrow morning." The assault began with precision airstrikes against the facility's external defensive positions, but the results were limited by the underground construction that protected most of its operation. The attack succeeded in eliminating some guard towers and disrupting communications, but the main facility remained intact. Provided precision fire support as team began their assault on the main entrance. His elevated position allowed him to engage individual targets while avoiding the defensive fires that were directed at the assaulting forces. His first shot eliminated a sniper who had taken position to cover the main approach route. The resistance was immediate and intense, with defenders demonstrating the kind of coordinated response that indicated extensive preparation for exactly this type of attack. Machine gun fire from concealed positions forced the assault teams to seek cover, while indirect fire weapons began targeting their approach routes. Heavy resistance at the main entrance, reported. These guys are definitely ready for us. Bear's team encountered similar resistance as they attempted to secure the tunnel exits above the facility. Defenders had established defensive positions at each potential escape route, turning what should have been a simple blocking mission into a series of individual firefights. The complexity of the tactical situation exceeded the planning assumptions that had guided their preparation for the mission. Had not only improved his defensive preparations, but had also recruited enough personnel to provide active defense of multiple positions simultaneously. Adjusted his position to get a better angle on the defensive positions that were causing problems for the assault teams. Through his scope, he could see that defenders were using sophisticated tactics that indicated professional military training at the unit level rather than individual competence. These guys are fighting as a coordinated unit, reported. They've got overlapping fields of fire and mutually supporting positions. This isn't just individual soldiers fighting independently. The discovery that had recruited an entire military unit, rather than individual soldiers, fundamentally changed the tactical situation. Instead of facing a security force of varying competence, they were confronting a well-trained and coordinated defense that had been specifically prepared for their type of assault. Made the decision to request additional air support while adjusting the ground assault to account for the unexpected level of resistance. The mission was still achievable, but it would require more time and resources than originally planned. Be advised, we're facing organized military resistance rather than individual defenders, reported to higher headquarters. Request additional close air support and possible reinforcement if available. The extended firefight that followed demonstrated both the effectiveness of defensive preparations and the determination of the Special Operations Forces to complete their mission despite unexpected challenges. Neither side was able to achieve decisive advantage, resulting in a prolonged engagement that tested the endurance and ammunition supplies of both forces. Continued to provide precision fire support while monitoring his ammunition consumption carefully. Unlike their previous encounters with forces, this engagement showed no signs of quick resolution, and conservation of resources was becoming a critical factor in mission success. After 6 hours of continuous fighting, his team finally achieved a breakthrough that allowed them to penetrate the facility's outer defenses, but himself remained elusive.